So Kluivert has little time to get this right, and his squad selection has to be right and spot on, and how the players respond will be key. While the local boys are likely to be a bit more subservient in character, but never underestimate what the local born Indonesians will feel if they feel significantly marginalized after a few games. And that's where that balancing act really has to come in. When Indonesia resumed their 2026 World Cup Final Asian qualifying campaign on the 20th of March against Australia away, there will be a new man in the dugout, Patrick Kluivert, better known as the iconic Netherlands and Ajax striker who also has had stints with prolific scoring rates, particularly at Barcelona and AC Milan. Kluivert was appointed as the new Indonesia national team coach after PSSI President Erick Thohir made the tough decision to remove the previous incumbent Shin Tae-yong from his post following a dismal ASEAN Championship campaign in December when they were eliminated in the group stage, and that was despite the South Korean having had to do with a largely under-21 squad. And now with Kluivert's new backroom coaching staff in place, what can we expect from the Garudas under the Dutch technical staff? So Tanyajan takes a look at what can possibly happen tactically and also one or two particular issues that could impact the Kluivert's reign with the Garudas. When we talk about the new Indonesia head coach Patrick Kluivert, we talk about him being one of the best goal scorers in Netherlands and world football in the 1990s and 2000s, where he made his name as the match winner in the 1995 Champions League final, where his only goal of the game helped Ajax defeat AC Milan in the final. And apart from that, he had also served with the Netherlands national team with distinction. And he's also better known as the father of current Premier League striker Justin Kluivert, who is currently at Bournemouth and had previously used to play for AS Roma of Italy. But beyond the name and the fame that he has built as a former player, and also I think even as a World Football Ambassador, his coaching record has been much more modest than his golden touch up front. And that said, we take a deeper look at how Kluivert would want to set his team up to play, especially with 4 matches remaining for the final round of World Cup qualifying in the race to join possible World Cup participants Japan from Group C by June this year. And so a quick overview of his coaching career since he hung up his boots. So after retiring following his last playing stint at French club Lille, he began his coaching career as an assistant coach at Brisbane Roar, and later was coaching the under-21 side of FC Twente, where he had his first coaching glory when he actually led them to the Youth League Championship. And between 2012 to 2014, he was part of the backroom staff that assisted Louis van Gaal in the Netherlands national team. His first role as the national head coach really began in earnest when he took on a rather modest job at Curacao national team, which is a member of the CONCACAF, or better known as the North American Confederation. And in that period, actually, he had a very modest, modest actually is quite apt to put it. He actually chose Krakow. It was partially because his mother hailed from that country, but more than that, actually, it was a ideal, quiet starting place to begin his career as a head coach, away from the glare in the European spotlight. And given his fame as an international player, he could easily be offered one of the high-profile coaching jobs in one of the top European leagues. But he decided to begin his career as a head coach in earnest in, you can say, lowly Krakow. And Krakow are by no means any world beaters. It's just that the high profile that Patrick Kluivert brought to the nation actually had an impact. He managed to convince several Dutch players who have Curacao blood or generational ancestry to convince them to play for the national team in a move that would otherwise have been less successful with other coaches. But still, he wasn't, unlike his fame as an elite player at world level, he wasn't able to move things at the same way he would have done as a poacher, as a striker in the final third inside the box. Still, when you look at how Kluivert set up his team, it's quite clear he is clearly influenced by the Dutch total football system, and he likes teams to play in a 4-3-3 formation. And by his own accounts, he would have loved teams to play free-flowing attacking football in accordance with the total football principles, where he was first influenced by the great Dutch legend Johan Cruyff, and also by his coaching mentor and former head coach Louis van Gaal. I think those influences that he had gained during his time, particularly at Ajax, had shaped the way how he saw football as it ought to be. And probably he tried to use these ideals and his methods into Curacao. It worked to a certain extent, as Curacao actually had a decent World Cup qualifying campaign where they eventually were eliminated in the third round for the 2018 World Cup, where they lost to El Salvador 0-2 on aggregate. And then he tried to push for the effort to reach the Caribbean Cup and as well as the Gold Cup, where they actually managed to succeed. It was rather modest results, but still it was a step in a significant direction because of his approach and his intent. Yes, the win record may not sound as impressive as how his goals had delivered victories for club and country in his playing days, but under his charge, Curacao actually scored 27 goals in more than 10 games under his tutelage. And then there's another gap that followed, where eventually he would coach a Turkish club in 2023, following another stint as assistant coach at the Cameroon national team and returning to Curacao as an interim. However, his time at Turkish club Adana Demirspor was rather less than inspiring, and he was unable to lift the team up to the places. So at club level, he showed in a way his limitations, again with a modest Turkish club, when he could also possibly be offered, given his high profile, maybe the likes of Turkish giants Fenerbahce, Besiktas or Galatasaray. But still, a not so great coaching record as a head coach, but he does have his ideas and his world fame, his influence, and you can see his charisma as a former player, as a former icon of the modern game. That's where his standing in the world game would make him such a useful face as the head coach of the Garudas. But beyond those points that I've mentioned about Patrick Kluivert's coaching career, I think you would anticipate that him wanting to play a similar free-flowing, beautiful game in a 4-3-3 formation, being able to exploit spaces and attack with speed. And given that that Indonesia currently has quite a substantial number of Dutch-born heritage players in the national squad, particularly 5 in the past year, and with more in the pipeline this year, I think it's quite clear that bringing the icon in was to illustrate that only his name and his fame could make the Dutch-born players listen to him and comply with the instructions, where quite a number of them had struggled under Shin Tae-yong. Through no fault of the South Korean, the South Korean had done such a magnificent job during his 5 years as the Garuda's head coach, guiding them to the Asian Cup finals for the first time since 2007, and really bringing them to the knockout stage for the first time ever, and also reaching the 2020 ASEAN Championship final where they lost to Thailand, and also nearly bringing the under 23 side to the 2024 Paris Olympics, only to, after finishing 4th in the under 23 Asian Cup and succumbing only 0-1 to Guinea in the final Inter-Confederation playoff. But with Kluivert, I think it's going to be quite different. It's not just the formation and possibly even the style of play. But given Kluivert's tactical limitations, despite his espousing of those ideas, I think Kluivert's main role is to adopt a policy to develop an environment where particularly those Dutch-born players will be very familiar with a more open environment, where compared to where Shin Tae-yong would have a more disciplined approach, where he expects players to all listen to him, whether the tactic is right or otherwise. But the Dutch players, I think, take away the early batch, especially those who went to the Asian Cup. Your Justin Hubner, your Sandy Walsh, and I think Rafael Strick, and one or two others, Elkan Bagot as well. Quite a number of them came in much later in last year's World Cup qualifying, and they were also not involved in the ASEAN Championship. So you can say that these Dutch-born players are not affected by the failure of the ASEAN Championships, and I think the success particularly of their goalkeeper Martin Pace and their captain Jay Isis, who is now attracting interest from Juventus, I think they are likely to respond better to how Kluivert and his Dutch-dominated backroom staff will be able to interact better. And that is the main thing that Eric Thohill wants, because Thohill has invested considerably in bringing those Dutch-born players with Indonesian heritage to be part of the Garuda's national team, with the goal of right now it is in a way clear that with Indonesia still in a good position for the second place spot, or even to advance into the next stage of the playoffs for the Asian playoff round, I think what Thohill wants is actually to have a coach who's high standing in world football, and even though he may be the face, but he will be able to influence those Dutch-born players to push for glory, to push for success, having been bred and educated in the Dutch total football system. And it is something that these players will be more familiar than what Shin Tae-yong was trying to do with his 5-3-2 or 3-5-2, 3-4-3 varied system that the players have executed with some success, but I suspect with certain frustrations from some of the newer Dutch-born players who probably struggle to comprehend the gameplay that Shin has in mind. But Kluivert alone is insufficient to make Indonesian football great at the world stage again. So he definitely needs his assistance. And among his assistants in the national team setup, the new assistant coach, Alex Pastor, is the one that is worth paying attention to. Already being dubbed by local and foreign media as the likely brains behind the entire Kluivert operation in the Garuda setup, Pastor's claim to rise to, you can say, standing within the group was particularly because of the work he did with Almere City, where he guided the lowly club into the Eredivisie and kept them in the league in the 23-24 season. They survived under his tactical guidance, and Pastor, like Kluivert, likes to play a 4-3-3. But he is more than capable of making tactical tweaks and adjustments based on the game situation and based on the opponents they face. And given that he has gained a significant amount of credibility within the Dutch top flight club system, you can expect Pastor to actually be the real mastermind when it comes to plotting the tactics for the final 4 games, particularly the must-win games at home against Bahrain in March and against China in June. I think these 2 games are very critical in whether Indonesia will join Japan as one of the top 2 finishers in the group and therefore qualifying for the World Cup finals on merit for the first time and making their second World Cup finals appearance since 1938, or reaching to the next stage of the playoff rounds where the remaining 6 teams still in contention for 2 more World Cup spots are to fight all over again to determine whether they can reach the next, to take the last 2 tickets reserved for Asian national teams. But still, when we look at Alex Pastor, what he can do, particularly with Almere City's record in the Eredivisie and previously in the Dutch second tier, what you can see is that he will bring something that was previously not so prevalent under Shin Tae-yong, and that will be a very high pressing game, a high pressing game of intense screening, especially when they lose the ball, and they will push high up to try to regain the ball or force their opponents to make mistakes or to force opponents to make awkward decisions on the ball, in the hope of, even if they don't win it back immediately, they will win it back at the second phase of that pressing, and that's when they will get dangerous. They will regroup when they regain possession, and they will cause problems once again higher up the pitch, instead of trying to soak back and hope that their opponents are unable to unlock the rather, you can say particularly in the World Cup qualifiers, a rather disciplined, but you can say a little rigid, but it's effective. It worked against many of the better Asian teams at this stage of World Cup qualifying. A notable aspect of Pastor's tactical leanings is on quick transitional play, where he likes players or his teams to use pace to run from behind and create dangerous passes in the final third. And that's where the 2 wingers in that setup, whether it's set by Kluivert or as his Lieutenant Pastor, that 4-3-3 system, the 2 wingers are the most important component in the way how Indonesia are going to play. But that said also, how they're going to operate is going to be as crucial as how they're being set up, because Indonesia is a different ball game, is a different kettle of fish from Almere City or even Curacao. When I talk about the coaches' previous clubs or better known teams where they had coached previously. And while Kluivert is likely to stick to his ideals, but it is more likely that Pastor, as his key assistant, could persuade Kluivert to that perhaps given the players that they have, they are still going to depend on those local born players that Kluivert will select in his first Indonesian squad next month to form that core, and it's like how you want them to play. When in that 4-3-3 system, which is a huge departure from how Shin Tae-yong had previously set up. And in Pastor's case, he not only he likes the wingers to be quick, but he is also adept, as I mentioned earlier, when it comes to, it's like teams would like to build from the back, but he's also adept in getting teams to say, okay, if the opponent is a very technically advanced team, like let's say Japan, when they play away in June, are they going to play short balls where they could be vulnerable to being caught out in their own defensive midfield just before the center circle? Or are they going to try to play long where the main battle will be to win the aerial duels? And that's where Pastor is more flexible in this approach when it comes to getting the results needed compared to Kluivert. So for Indonesia, the good news is they have an assistant who is capable of making significant tactical tweaks when needed, particularly against certain opponents. Then we also talk about another standout lieutenant in Kluivert's setup. Also Dutch, also a former Dutch national player. His name is Gerald van den Berg. Not only is he going to be an assistant in the Indonesian Garuda setup, he's also the under-23 head coach and will also serve as an advisor in the under-17 and under-20 setup. I mean, for this former midfielder in question, his last significant post, in particular in this decade, was with the Ajax under-21, or sometimes we refer them as John Ajax, where he has guided them as a technical coach in the last few years and had also previously been with them in the under-17 and under-18 setup in the whole Ajax youth system. And given his vast experience guiding the young players and also coaching in the past decades, his experience will come in vital in molding the players in how he want the future Garudas to play from the under-23 and below, in the similar way as how Kluivert and Pastor are going to try to do the same for the Garudas when they convene in March ahead of the next World Cup qualifier in Sydney. But despite the promise and also you can say the varying natures on how these three Dutch coaches are going to bring to the template, the huge question mark is, how is this new technical setup going to impact the local born players? In this 4-3-3 setup, it is going to be quite clear that Rizky Ridho, who has otherwise been a regular in Shin Tae-yong's 11 in the final round of World Cup qualifying, he could have to settle for himself a place on the bench. Then you have the other question, with more Dutch-born players likely to join the ranks of Kevin Dix, Ragnar Omartogen, and a few more. What about the other local bonds? Who is going to who will deserve that place in the 11? Because maybe for the neutral Indonesian fans, they aren't going to care whether it's an all Dutch 11 or endure what rival fans would say, what Dutch B, Dutch C, what and whatever. But for those who are more who are more passionate in the local side of the game, they will be very concerned about a potential absence of local born players in the starting 11. So I think as a compromise, which Shinteo has already done a long time ago, Kluivert could be told to include one local born players, just one, at least one, just to make sure that it's not too overly lopsided. But the trick is that local born player who is selected has to be up to the task. Shinteo has used a few local born players in their respective starting roles in this World Cup qualifying phase so far, with some success. Risky Rido being a standout with his outstanding defensive performances in a three-man centre-back partnership. Then you also have Marselino, who was fabulous against Saudi Arabia with a brace and was a major contributor at this phase as well. Then you got reliable backups who can also operate on the wings with energy, like Pramata Ahan and Asnawi Mangkualam. And you probably have one or two more like Yaakob Sayuri, who has the pace to cause problems with his speed and strength against your opposition, who are not going to be slouches like a few of the minor Southeast Asian nations. But still, the challenge is Kluivert going to, you can say, is Kluivert going to use this opportunity to have an all foreign born 11? It is possible, but will it upset some of the Indonesians? We don't know, because after all, like it or otherwise, national team football at times is a little political, and sometimes Kluivert may not like it, but Kluivert, Pastor and the rest of the coaching staff, they may have no choice but to include a local born, just to, you can say, keep Eric Thohir, keep the other factions inside the Indonesian football political sphere happy, but also I think not at the expense of losing a game or drawing a game, which may be costly, given that Indonesia is in a mad 5-team scramble for second place, and it's almost a given that Japan will qualify by next month. 2 more games and Japan are through as group winners. So it's the other 5 teams in Group C fighting for it, and Indonesia do not want to miss out on the ticket at the earliest opportunity. And where that is concerned, I do believe that the closest candidate who should be able to command a starting 11 spot would be Marcelino Ferdinand. Normally he operates in the attacking or central midfield role, but at times during this campaign he could be stretched out to the left under Shin Tae-yong's 5-3-2 system. But under the 4-3-3 system that is going to be used, where does Marcelino fit in? Who is going to be the engine that can keep things going without causing too much frustration for the rest, because their football education level is a lot higher than the local bonds? But will they be able to bridge that gap seamlessly, or would it be somehow a turn for the local bonds to complain? Because as I have mentioned before in an interview with Nizam of Siadang Bola last month, or back in last month, we were talking about how there is no honeymoon period for Kluivert and any other new head coach of any Southeast Asian national team, the new coach. So it is about getting the result from the get-go. So Kluivert has little time to get this right, and his squad selection has to be right and spot on, and how the players respond will be key. While the local bonds are likely to be a bit more subservient in character, but never underestimate what the local born Indonesians will feel if they feel significantly marginalized after a few games. And that's where that balancing act really has to come in. If the local bonds really feel so sidelined that no one feels that urge that to compete, to want to stay in the Garuda setup, the way Shin Tae-yong has managed to get the local bonds motivated. That's where the real challenge lies. And significantly and beyond the national team, at the youth level from the under 23 and below, Vandenberg has a very interesting situation. During Shin Tae-yong's 5-year reign as Garuda's head coach, he formed a very new local core with those players whom I've mentioned earlier. And many of these players have been with him since 2020 or even 2021. Only Marselino made his debut. Maybe Asnawi, Pramata and Marselino may have had made their debuts slightly pre-Shin era. But still that local core and the number of players Shin Tae-yong is able to influence at both the national team and the under 23 levels, there's only so much, as we found out at great cost in the ASEAN Championship. Like, Shin can only influence up to 50 players, 50 local born Indonesian players to do the job for country when national duty calls. And it's the same dilemma that Vandenberg is going to face as the under 23 head coach. Because what Shin is unable to do is to completely restructure the way clubs develop their players, how clubs train their players, how the setup is going to be a professional standard setup from his experience in South Korea is going to be. So it's a bigger challenge for Vandenberg to show what he can do, how many more players he can influence, especially the local boss, more than what Shin Tae-yong has done. And given the high bar that Shin Tae-yong has set for both the national team and under 23s, Vandenberg has a delicate task in trying to find your new Marcelinos, your new Pramata Ahans, your new Witan Suleimans, to try and see whether they are as up to the mark as what these guys have been. Because if they are not up to the mark, it's going to be very difficult to replace them, especially when players inevitably do age and get older and one day will step out of the national team. And that is whether he's local born or the current naturalized Dutch players. And to raise them to a similar level that is demanded in under the Kluivert regime that is just over a month old. It is not as simple as just posing for photographs and talking the correct words, the correct phrases, or even using a bit of Bahasa Indonesia, but it's about delivering more than what Shin Tae-yong has done. And that is the massive challenge that Vandenberg in particular has to do. Shin Tae-yong could only influence up to 50 local players in the national setup. Can Vandenberg do more? Can Vandenberg revamp the system that eventually has total football ingrained in all the local clubs, in all the local academies, in all the Indonesian-based academies? Like, okay, this is how we ought to play football in Indonesia, using elements of the Indonesian characteristics plus the influence from total football. Because what is clear is Indonesian youth football as a whole remains quite unpolished, despite the promise and the wealth of talent that Indonesian football has. Whether it is what Shin Tae-yong has done with the under 23 setup, or what Dennis Wise and Des Walker had done with the Bola Diri with the Garuda Select during those 4 seasons on Bola TV, I think you can only influence up to 50, 60 players at most, but can Vandenberg do a lot more? This is an interesting question that Vandenberg himself has to think about. Because if he's able to pull this off, even if Kluivert and Pastor do not do as well as the Garuda's head coach, it is quite likely that the imprint for total football in Indonesia could be more secure if Vandenberg is able to leave an imprint that other succeeding, perhaps that other new Dutch coaches, whenever they come, to continue this plan to eventually establish a broad base where, given the population that Indonesia has, is more than capable of developing teams that could one day even surpass the national teams that Shin Tae-yong has already done during the past 5 years.